Okay, folks, hope you can hear me. Usual thing, points and prizes for those that either alert me on the chat that they can't hear me or that they can hear me, or usually drop me a message. Friends of mine WhatsApping me, telling me that something's not working. So hopefully that's all going live. I'm Jack Chew. This is Chewing It Over, and today slightly different episode for now. In that sometimes I do these solo, but what I'm doing is I'm immediately reflecting on an editorial for MSK Mag that isn't actually out yet, but it went live on what I call the Editor's Desk newsletter, which I do on LinkedIn. So the MSK Mag editorial that I write each month, that goes a few days before the first of the month, which is when the mag's out. We put that up on LinkedIn, and so that went out this morning, and it's something that ahead of time I've been discussing it with various different friends and colleagues. It's then provoked quite a conversation. I've had quite a number of messages and emails about it today because people resonating with people. Some people pushing back, which is great, of course, as well. So I'm not suggesting that everyone's agreeing with it, but what I thought might be useful would be that I discuss it, what motivated it, as well as then me explaining the rationale for why I wrote it, as well as what I think could be done about it. Because obviously these things only scratch the surface a little bit, don't they, sometimes? And also I think some of the people that have disagreed with it are challenging parts that I think some of them would disagree if they knew my opinion in full, and some would probably find that they agree more with me than they can with the tidbit that they've seen of my views on this matter. So it's called quality control, and it's me just giving my take. And it's a bit ranty, if I'm honest. That's one of the things that's interesting about it, is that I don't sometimes like myself when I do that, and I run it by my team and our copywriters and things, and say, like, am I going off on one about this? Is this a good vibe? But it's also, it is my opinion, and it's a well considered one, even if it's wrong. It's something I've thought about a lot and feel fairly qualified to give my take on, having been involved across different elements of clinical practice education, operationalizing quality care, as well as then the wider small and large P politics that affect the ability for us to quality control and somewhat regulate our professions. So I'm going to first off start with, so yeah, I've got there's me title, Quality Control in MSK Care. My latest ranty MSK Mag editorial wants a podcast rant too. So this is where I might be adding further fuel to the fire unnecessarily by doing more about it. But it seems worth, my style would be to unpack it further and to add more colour to it rather than leave it hanging and potentially confuse people. So what did I say in the MSK Mag quality control editorial that again isn't out yet on MSK Mag, but it's out on LinkedIn under the editor's desk, which is where you can get my writings a little sooner. So one of the things I thought I'd do, which is going to probably feel a little bit weird, I don't know how well I'll do this and whether it goes down well, but in case you haven't read it and you'd rather listen to it, then I'm actually going to read the editorial out, and then we will reflect on it, and I'll give you a bit more colour. So hopefully I'll just find it here, and I will give you a take on what it is I said. So quality control. Our primary problem is not just that MSK therapy is a very difficult job to do well, it is that it's a very easy job to do badly. This has created a circumstance where a quality, evidence-informed therapist needs to work to derive a compelling narrative about each patient's diagnosis and how to scale their function towards their individual goals, whilst the patient is influenced by nonsense of all flavours from seemingly reputable clinicians and organisations. A couple of examples. A 62-year-old gentleman, I didn't put gentleman, actually, that's a Freudian slip. A 62-year-old patient presents with worsening medial knee pain, is diagnosed with OA knee, told that he has age-related wear and tear of the cartilage. He's given a sheet of the following exercises to do twice a day: straight leg raise, red banded knee extension, small knee bend, calf raises, and clamshells. He's unsure why he should be exercising if his knee is wearing out, but he does the program for a couple of weeks as they're easy. Nothing changes, so he gets a second opinion, which immediately feels much more detailed. This time, meniscal micro-tearing and bony edema is diagnosed, with inflammation suggested to be a key component of ongoing symptoms. He is given a cryocuff device for the swelling, an orthotic device for his overpronation, told to avoid citrus fruits and to mix turmeric into various foods. He is advised that weight-bearing exercise is aggravating the issue, and so to swim twice a week between sessions of manual therapy, which will flush out the toxins in the surrounding muscles and loosen off the stiff knee joint. This felt good for a couple of weeks, especially because in order to take his recovery seriously, he took some time off his work as a plumber and avoided the hiking that had been sore for the past few months. Unfortunately, on returning to work, his symptoms quickly returned, and as he was feeling miserable not seeing his walking pals, he caught up with them on what should have been an easy hike, and it was sore much sooner than it used to be. It is fashionable to be relativistic about care quality, especially in light of an evidence base that is inconclusive. I've got inverted commas here, so I'm going to do the fingers. Who are we to judge? What's it matter as long as it works? And let 1,000 flowers bloom, etc. In every aspect of my life, I am deeply unfashionable, and so I consider myself well qualified to judge. I absolutely think it matters how things work, and some of the 1,000 flowers in MSK are absolutely poisonous to our reputation. So in this case, helping a 62-year-old plumber could have instead involved a discussion about the work and leisure demands of his body, as well as what those tasks mean to him financially, socially, and psychologically. How do his symptoms behave in relation to these things and other tasks that he has found these to be modified? Has he found? Sorry, I'm fluffing my lines here. It's going live. This is the risk of live radio, folks. In relation to these and other tasks, and has he found these to be modifiable in any way? Let's assume the OA diagnosis is correct here, and so helping him to understand what OA is and isn't would tee up a conversation about treatment and management that would make more sense. Rehab that links to his functional needs and is dosed to challenge but not aggravate could then be easily comprehended. His expectations can be managed based on short, medium, and long-term prognostic indicators, and with discussions about supplementary care such as bracing, injections, and surgeries as appropriate, whilst reassuring him that they are likely unnecessary frontline interventions. I so wish that this was purely hypothetical, but this unwarranted variation in care, I so wish that this was purely hypothetical, but this unwarranted variation in care for what is a routine and typical case is seriously alarming. I despair because we have nothing in place through regulators, professional bodies, or education standards that can reduce this variation in care quality. Before I point to the shining light of hope, which does exist, panic not, the first example of poor quality care is unethical and complacent undertreatment that is a typical output of an NHS MSK department that never needs to worry about filling its waiting room. The second example of poor quality care is unethical and complacent overtreatment that is a typical output of an independent private practice that never need worry that someone asking them to justify their care. All we have as safeguards are the ethical scruples of individual clinicians aspiring to do better for their patients. I think we deserve more. But until then, we will continue to provide education from the best in the industry who embrace the messy reality of evidence-informed, personalised care. Such as the mighty Val Jones, who is concerned about distal biceps rupture, Andrew Macaulay, who is bound to make you hungry with his exercise prescription recipe analogy. Deepak Ravindran continues the food theme as he asks why we aren't talking more about nutrition in pain management. Our sports physio journeyman Steve Miller gives insights on the Paris Olympics, and legend of the game, Leslie Holdsworth, OBE, shares her view from the balcony with a reflection on her career as a change agent who still longs for reform. It's an easy job to do badly, but if we stick together in raising care standards, then maybe some adults will turn up in the other rooms to make it at least less hard to do the job well. So that was my MSK Mag editorial for March, which comes out on the 1st in print, and get your MSK Mag if you haven't already. But it comes out then, and we send the editorial out to this editor's desk newsletter that goes out on LinkedIn. We've got some comments there. I've had some emails. I've had some texts from people that have my number about it. Some liking it, some not liking it. But generally speaking, people it's bristled everyone in the right way. As I said, a little bit ranty, sometimes a little bit pessimistic. I think sometimes I come across as, which is a shame because I think fundamentally I'm pretty optimistic. But what I wanted to do in this podcast is, as well as read it to you, is then to unpack a little bit on why I said it and what we can do about it. And so that's where I'm going to go. Okay, so the main reason I said it is because I care about these matters, and it's something it's my platform of which I can do that with. And you guys seem to be enjoying my editorials and my sort of chewing it over style going into written word, because I've always been a podcaster. That was kind of, I wasn't a blogger that became a podcaster. Whilst I've written stuff down on social media before, I've not really been known for writing. So MSK Mag's been great for that, and my editorials seem to be going down fairly well. So I share my views, right? And these are views that I do hold. And so that's the main reason I said it, is because I can and because I think it matters. Now, the other reason is because I increasingly encounter, it's a real meeting of my worlds, right? So I'm in clinical practice seeing people, and I over-index on second opinion, eighth opinion work because of the nature of Physio Matters, and because I'm sort of relatively Googleable and I've got an odd surname and it makes me fairly easy to track, is that people will sometimes travel far and wide, or if they're local, they might have come to me because other people have struggled to help them. And so they've kind of even Googled second opinion sometimes, and we kind of do show up there because that's the nature of what we do for Physio Matters, with taking referrals from other professionals and stuff like that. So compared to normal practice, I do see a lot of second opinion work. It reminds me a little bit of when I was in AP and ESP in NHS care, is that most of the patients, if not all the patients you've seen, have been seen before. And so a lot of people are in that situation, but I suppose not necessarily always in private practice, having the independence that I have here. And so I have this meeting of worlds whereby I see this variation, and I take with a pinch of salt what patients say, of course, about their experiences, but sometimes you've got evidence of that. They come with clinic letters, or they come with notes that they've made, or they come with emails that they then show you as to what they've suggested is going on, or they show you exercise sheets, which is what happened in this case. And you kind of despair, and then I immediately have my Physio Matters hat on, in thinking, how could we do better with this? These people, these therapists are well-meaning often, and they just don't know what they don't know, or they're in a system of which is meaning that they can't deliver quality care, and that is a shame. Now, of course, there is a sort of arrogance, I know, of that, of saying like, look at these two examples of things that went badly, and here's me saving the day, and aren't I brilliant, right? So, of course, this is one of the things I reflected on in the editorial, is that I completely am aware of how that comes across, and I hope it doesn't sound as arrogant as that. But it's something that I do think is worth me admitting to, is that I do find that a relativistic attitude that kind of says like, well, who am I to judge in the fan? It's like, look, I just had a different take on the matter, and it kind of got better, and therefore aren't I lucky, rather than, it was good luck rather than good judgment. It's like, in these sorts of circumstances, I just disagree. I think I'm very fortunate, of course, to have been exposed to what I think are best practice principles from our educators, and I've got a really unique circumstance where a network of therapists can scrutinize my work, as well as then refine a model of rehabilitation in MSK. I do not take for granted the opportunity that I've had to be educated by the best and brightest, and to be able to interview them and drop them a text and something if I'm puzzled about something, right? It's super unique, the circumstance, right? And I'm also not for a second suggesting I am the tippy top of quality care at all. Hopefully I'm in the top half, right? I want to be, a bit hopefully better than a roll of the dice. However, I think it is uncontroversial to suggest that there is massive unwarranted variation in care. The circumstances I'm describing aren't so unusual. I don't think that people that are then really trying to, especially within our audience, that are spending lots of their spare time trying to be the best version of themselves, which includes their professional selves, and they are paying attention to the oohs and ahs of how CPD is evolving, the reflections and information that comes from the evidence. I think that people are in a position where they are witnessing a version of what I'm describing. And so if you grant me that, so if you grant me the fact that that is a problem, is it a problem that we can solve? Or what are the touch points, I guess, with that problem that we can reflect on? And so I would say that in clinical practice, you've got to be a professional enough to not start shitting on your colleagues, right? And shitting on your colleagues, like literally, but on their views or their background and stuff. And you take it with a pinch of salt, and you have the professionalism to not just start poo-pooing what they've said. Sometimes you have to sort of admit, and you seem too squirmy if you don't say, well, I disagree with that, but these are things that different professionals have different opinions and stuff. Sometimes I'll do that, but other times it's like, well, they saw you then, and this is me seeing you now. now, and so let's just take it for the moment. And so you have that bit clinically, a lot you can do with that, other than you've got to just try and do your best for that patient. There are circumstances, I think, where, especially if it's something local, or it's someone that you feel that you'd be able to pick something up. If it's a massive difference of opinion, it's difficult to do so. But if there's a subtle difference of opinion, and you feel it's become a bit repetitive, I've had circumstances where I've then reached out to other professionals. Quite difficult, because it feels like a bit of an arrogant power play, especially if they then put me name into Google, or they have heard of what we're doing in Physio Matters. They feel a bit judged, and it's very difficult to do. So I do it sparingly. But I've had some success in reaching out to some clinicians and saying, like, this is third patient on the bounce that I've seen that you've made this suggestion for some sort of biomechanical change for correction to their throwing form or something like that. And that's, they just, it could be incidental, but they're coming in with these problems, and also they're just aspiring to this level of form that seems to be tensing them up. I just want to talk that through with you, and sort of let you know of these consequences, as well as the fact if we need to sort of debate why you think that's valid and it's something you're really into, then I just want to understand it better and stuff. And I've had some success in that. And by the way, not dissimilar to the description I've just given you. So that can be done clinically. Then you've got this educational layer, where obviously I then am in a spot where I look on at this situation and think, right, why are we getting such a significant amount of variation? And how unique is that to, say, physiotherapy or to the MSK therapies writ large? So I often use those things. I don't use them too interchangeably, because physiotherapy is a profession that's defined and regulated as a profession. But it's also that I have much more in common in terms of the clinical work I'm on about, and the circumstances in this editorial. I have much more in common with a sports therapist, osteopathic chiropractor that would be seeing someone in this situation for MSK, or even a sports doc or orthopedic surgeon that might be assessing said OA&E, right? So best practice MSK, physiotherapy is a massive, large part of that workforce, but it also has other professions. It's why I speak the language of MSK therapies. But in this instance, as educational standards go for MSK therapies, I can't help but then look on and think, right, what might we do to better get the word out, so that people aren't unaware of what might be better ways of thinking about or looking at these things. And obviously, I'm in a good position to do that, right? So how can we spread the word? How can we help people to know better and therefore do better? Because they're often well-meaning people. These aren't charlatans that are doing things wrong by accident, doing things wrong on purpose. If we're wrong by accident. I'm forever saying this. And so I think in those terms, I then go further and think, right, what operational circumstances exist around people's lives as clinicians that then also then push them out of shape into doing and behaving in certain ways? So, for example, it could well be, I don't think it excuses it, by the way, but I think that there's circumstances that surround NHS care where people feel squeezed and so pressed for time that then all they can do really is the description of what I've just described for this gent for OA&E. I think that there's two things that I really disagree with on there. Is one, the explanations and the way in which they felt undereducated and dismissed. It's a complacency that comes from the fact that they didn't really care whether they saw him again, and there was always going to be someone to fill his seat. So I see this happening. I think this is a problem within the public sector across various different domains, but particularly in our services, is that what are the consequences of that sort of behaviour, really? There's plenty on the patient, but on the therapist, there's no real accountability to that. And there's also nothing that's grossly unsafe enough for them to really be called out on it, I don't think. So unless we've got the checks and balances that exist that are very variable from team to team, trust to trust, service to service, then you just end up in this situation where they're just giving out a sheet of exercises and giving a sort of cobbled together diagnosis. By the way, of course, the diagnosis correct in this instance, by the way. That's one of the things that I could rant about again, is the variation in diagnostic standards. But let's just say that's what's happened here. And they give this exercise sheet. Now, of course, that's where it's like, this exercise sheet, it's such a crap program for this patient. Now, I also know the patient, right? So I know it was a crap program, but also it's just that it was so easy for him to do that it wasn't going to stimulate any of the changes that you might have been looking for if your perception was that this needed to be stronger, right? Clamshell, calf raise, small knee bend. It felt easy, but also that he felt that should I be doing this anyway because my knees are wearing out. So they hadn't got an understanding of it. So no one had just stopped at the end of the appointment and said, "Does that make sense? What's your understanding of this?" And just having that moment where they can actually clarify and negotiate with a patient and come up with a shared goals, right? Shared decision making or personalized care or whatever. So I accept that the operational circumstances around a service are always going to colour people's care, and I'll come to the private example in a minute. But it's just, I just cannot. I actually really loathe people using a systemic excuse for what was a combined issue, right? The circumstances surrounding your employment in the NHS, in an NHS service, and the pressures that you're under, you'll struggle to find someone more sympathetic than me to that. It's become almost my life's work to try and raise care standards across all sectors in this. And I've been out of the NHS now reluctantly somewhat for a few years, but my wife still works within it. I've got to live and pay tax within this country in such a way that I want healthcare to be better. But unless you're telling me that you were on a stopwatch for 4 minutes, I could only see patients for 4 minutes now, 4-minute new patients, 2-minute follow-ups. Like, of course, I know I'm being extreme there, but it's just that I'm trying to. If I was trying to be give an ample excuse for what I witnessed in this case and regularly witness in terms of that complacent undertreatment that I was describing before, I would have to be granting an absolute nonsense, cartoonish version of the problems that you're facing. And so then, does that mean that these therapists that are being demoralized in such that no wonder they're just creating protocolized care? I can understand that phenomena too, but also I do not excuse you ethically for that behaviour. There is absolutely no way that I think that the systemic faults existing amongst our health system and our society writ large excuse you for behaving like that with vulnerable people. Nah, first do no harm. So I don't excuse that. So to the second example, where someone is maybe has more control over the variables of their care and the time they might have with them. Unfortunately, they then start almost having a slightly different protocol. They've used a wishy-washy, almost jargon-laden way to describe OA, meniscal microtearing and underlying bony edema. Right. Annoyingly, that showed me in some ways that therapist knew some of the underlying pathophysiology, which is relatively contemporary, to understand that this is something that essentially is cartilaginous, but also the underlying bone's probably relevant and stuff like that. And, it's kind of a shame in some ways that this person's kind of, there's some semblance of an update there, isn't there? But unfortunately, they then, there's all sorts of stuff in there. What did I say about, like, they said, oh, this is to do with the inflammatory profile and stuff. And so, yeah, by the way, citrus fruit's not going to be avoiding citrus fruit's not going to improve the chemical balance within the knees. No evidence for that. Turmeric, it's been done to death, and that's been well studied. And believe me, that's not going to have its anti-inflammatory effects that you're stirring it into your porridge. Then there was the orthotics, based on a wet footprint test in this instance, which was just, this idea of narrow biomechanical and kinematic variables that would be provoking OA based on foot shape, not based on any semblance of that person's function, and some sort of test retest and symptom modification that they'd done in this instance, by the way. Not that that'd excuse it at all, but yeah, coincidentally, 325 quid it cost them for these carbon fibre orthotics that I don't think were indicated, especially not first line. So you've just got this circumstance where then you think, right, operationally, you've got a variety of parameters around their care that, again, I can be a bit sympathetic for. So their overheads might be pretty brutal, right? So let's just make this person a sole business owner. I don't think they were in this instance. I can't remember who it was, but let's try and paint a picture where you can understand some of this behavior. Let's try and think that they fundamentally think that that's what someone needs. And especially if they've come out of the NHS and they've been complacently undertreated, and therefore they should just lean in. Personalized care means that then I'm gonna give you something here that's based purely on what I see, feel, and hear. And so they give what feels like a really specific diagnosis, when actually it's awkward. You just didn't want to say OA or understand OA properly or explain that that's the case. You want to give some sort of probably arguably out of scope, if you're being so clumsy with it, dietary advice that feels, again, very personalised. This is how you do it. You wouldn't get this in the NHS. Then you're giving, I think it was 2 devices. You're going to cryocuff in this instance. Fair enough if you want to, but you're numbing it. You're numbing it and applying pressure to it. And the device given was pretty naff in terms of applying pressure, and not an especially aggressively swollen or physiologically active knee, by the way. Certainly not when I'd seen them, but they described it as not massively changed. And then this orthotic device is a biomechanical correction. Again, any sensible update in understanding biomechanical factors and the way in which the body can adapt around certain ways in which you move, and that's how he's formed, and that could open another can of worms, and in some ways did, by the way, in the fullness of time with this case. I think it's just such a shame. There's just a lot of dated knowledge there that means that this person is probably working in isolation, at least within an NHS service. You often got many therapists that are cross-pollinating ideas, you're learning stuff between curtains or in team meetings, or you've got training, and you've got a circumstance whereby there are ways in which you can cross-pollinate ideas. Where sometimes isolated private practice, I think this is one of the things that can come of it, is that people don't know what they don't know, and they've got no mechanism. No one's actually saying, why'd you do that, why'd you do that, why'd you do that, right? There's no mechanism of them self-improving. And so that's one of the ways in which I think this can develop. So then and also, I should mention, I realised where I was going with it before, is that the facilities of which they have as a small business, right? Say they've got a small team of clinicians. They've just had a national insurance hike, okay, that they might have been able to account for, because that happens quite abruptly politically. So they've got increased overheads. Energy bills, massive challenge to small business, in such a way that then costs going up. Might be reluctant, and understandably so, to put prices up, or they can't do that dynamically, and so therefore income is no higher. Energy bills going up, market factors affecting the likelihood of people to have the cash flow to then invest in private physiotherapy might make it a marketing challenge, or that you have to then spend more on marketing and advertising to get patients in. So again, overheads are going up, income's coming down. So then when you have opportunity to, even especially if, and let's just be fair here and say that in circumstances such as this, there's not evidence that they're selling this to someone that they don't think needs it. But there's definitely biases and motivations that make people then think, well, look at that, he's overpronating. Therefore, I can just suggest that this would help, and therefore, if he wants to pay 300 quid for a set of orthotics, then that's a sensible indication. It's a clinically indicated intervention based on their logic. It's not, by the way, but it's based on their logic. And therefore, then if they've got the opportunity to do that and that person's willing to pay, then the fact that they've probably got margin on that, would be strange if they don't. I'd judge them probably if they didn't have margin on it. But say they pay 200 quid and they pay 200 quid and then take 100 quid profit from it or something. Then that's the nature of doing business, by the way. Those costs are factored into NHS care too. And so that's one of the things that happens that will be affecting it will be biasing their decision making, right? And so, just as I've mentioned, the operational circumstances surrounding that clinician that makes me then far from quick to judge them for all parts of it, that is affecting the private clinician too, and bending them out of shape on their decision making. And so, again, just as I spoke down the camera aggressively to our first clinician about the fact that does not justify it ethically, all of the things I'm describing don't justify it ethically. It's bad practice. It's poor. It's not something that you sign up for. You're meant to. The attempt at sort of self-regulation that occurs when we sign ourselves against our regulator, or that when we aspire to be professionals and we're deciding to be in healthcare, in a young profession, young industry which is evolving. You think about those early days of your career where you were judged against a knowledge and skills framework. It wasn't done very well, but you essentially are paid to improve. You're not just paid to exist. And so the way in which you get out of touch to the point in which you're then using and relying on dated practice, that then actually is, in these instances, harmful to my taste because of, again, first do no harm, as I mentioned earlier. I just do not excuse that behaviour. However, of course, it's nested within a social circumstance that makes it bloody difficult to do the job well. That's the whole point of this editorial, is that it's so easy to do the job badly. It wasn't difficult work to do the pathway management that these two clinicians had done. It just A led to B led to C in a really natural way, without a massive cognitive engagement that would be to personalize and help explain it to the therapist. Sorry, to the patient as a therapist. And so it's that makes it a really challenging circumstance, because I've just mentioned what can you do clinically, what can you do what are the clinical parameters of how to put this right, and I just think I've realised I've not done my little ticker. What could be done about it? What are the actual solutions? I'm coming to that, and I'm kind of on with that, aren't I? Saying what could you do clinically, what can you do operationally, what can you do educationally. And then there comes the really big issue, and it's something that I hint to at the end there as the editorial. And I think if I had more time, and I often waffle, and sometimes those editorials are already too long for the page, but I get a chance to unpack it a bit more here, is that one of the things that I find frustrating when I think about the operational circumstances surrounding the therapist, that is something that people are absolutely right to be sympathetic to, and absolutely right that is a big factor affecting care. Yet when it comes to care quality, there is absolutely no mechanism for us to actually offer any self-improvement on that. So 3 that I mentioned in the piece, our regulators, so the HCPC and their equivalents across on osteopathy, the PSA for sports therapists, etc. There's absolutely, the regulatory framework is interested in safety and not quality. It just absolutely, it's interested is not the right word. I can't peer into their minds, and these are organizations rather than people. But I'm just meaning like they regulate against safety far more than they regulate against quality, and there's no harm in that. But they need to be able to do both if they were going to be a quality, a credible regulatory framework. And so abuses and unsafe practices and things like that, that in the overt sense of mismanagement, misdiagnosis, missing red flags, etc., or abuses of power and illegality and fraud and all that sort of stuff, right? They get stuck in, right? But when it comes to actually then regulating against quality standards, I just don't think, I think they're absolutely lost. And also, I'm not someone that's for really heavy-handed regulation. I think it should be fairly light touch. But if it's light touch, there's got to be a format in which we can at least self-regulate and peer regulate, or be accountable to a system that makes for there to be at least a bar. Right? How high the bar should be, interesting to discuss, and I love those debates. But there should be a bar. At the moment, the bar is that we sign every few years against our regulator that we're still adhering to a set of standards, of which most people don't read, and I understand why. And then occasionally a certain amount of us then have to then submit a portfolio of evidence, which is absolute nonsense paper exercise, by the way. I've done it. I can't remember if I've done it twice, but maybe our household's done it twice at least, and many of our team have had to do it and stuff. It's absolute nonsense, can be absolutely gamed. There's not a credible process of quality assurance at all. It's an absolute, people get worried about it when they shouldn't be, because it's absolutely just a garbage paper exercise. Wastes everyone's time. Everyone's annoyed at that, but generally speaking, it's not something to be worried about, or something that's like this set of really wise MSK professionals pontificating about whether or not you're good enough to be regulated under the HCPC or equivalent. Absolutely not. So the regulators aren't at town on this, and whether they should be or not, I don't know. But then it comes to, say, professional bodies. So you've got things like the CSP, the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. In my profession of physiotherapy, you've got people like the SST, BASRAT, for sports therapists, sports rehabilitators. Then you've got Royal College of Podiatry. You've got different societies across chiropractic, such as BCA, or you've got the actual GCC, which is their that's their regulator. Sorry, you've got the Royal College of Chiropractic, isn't it? RCC. But you've got various different bodies of which then could be weighing in on this sort of stuff, right? Having code of conduct, if you're a member, you should be adhering to these sorts of things and principles and stuff, right? So it's that light touch, where you're saying, if you're part of this club, then this is what we do and this is how you do it. But usually these are membership organisations that still just take your money. I mean, what's amusing is the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy is as a chartered society that you basically just buy your chartership by joining your trade union. And so there's no a physiotherapist and a chartered physiotherapist. The gap between those two things is £30 a month or whatever it is, and increasing, as people often get annoyed about. And so one of the things that's interesting is that, do you think chartered accountants, if any of you know chartered accountants, chartered surveyors, do you think that they were just handed a chartership a week after they graduated? Well done on your bachelor's degree. You're now chartered because you're willing to pay us, and you will be unchartered by then being unwilling to pay us and stuff. Do you think that's how it works? Then have a little look into it. Go and speak to an accountant. Go to speak to a surveyor. We're using a cultural language there that is an absolute bait and switch, and it's unbelievable that we do that. And it terrifies me, because we looked into that when we were doing MSK reform. So they're obviously not. Well, it would be rude for me to say they're not interested. The CSP is not interested. Right? I've sat on council until recently. Some fantastic people that I left behind on council, somewhat reluctantly. And that I'm not for a second saying that those as individuals don't care, or that the top brass in leadership or whatever don't care about quality. It's more that they are just not at the races when it comes to actually then what might improve that. There is absolutely no appetite, or they wouldn't know where to go in terms of like trying to lay out some sort of bar as to what quality care looks like. And also that they wouldn't really be into the conversation about what are the carrots and what are the sticks in terms of how you might help to create a set of consequences for the poor practice practice being described, or incentivizing and celebrating the best practice that we might want instead of. They're just not at that show. And to be fair, I don't, in their defence, I don't see it being done very well elsewhere. I've been Royal College of Podiatry and the BCA, which is a small group of chiropractors and stuff. They really have tried to stick their neck out, but there's much smaller numbers, and it's definitely been more carrot than stick. And I understand why, but it's just so bloody awkward to, one, admit that you've got a massive amount of unwarranted variation in a profession and in an industry. That's awkward anyway, right? I understand why. It's easier for me to say than it is for those organizations and stuff, in part because they're often trying to promote, and it's easier to say like, all is well here. We've got 80,000 or 70,000 physiotherapists in this country, and they're all brilliant, and therefore you should have more. We need to train more of them, and we should have more job opportunities for them, etc. It's just an easier narrative. And so instead of saying like, we've got the quantity, but the quality is something that we're kind of hidden from, is awkward. And then we've not got any education standards that make any sense. So I think these are the sorts of things that used to matter. If you had a network of high quality master's programs or some sort of well-credentialed and credible CPD networks, that meant that then you could have this differentiation between a therapist without that qualification and with that qualification. And yet again, I struggle to see it emerging, which is disappointing. And also something that I think we at Physio Matters maybe have been hiding from. I think maybe we've been too shy to not allow for and get stuck into that credentialing process, because we've always been averse to it, because we just thought conversation had ironed things out, or that sunlight would be the best disinfectant. I've been guilty of making these sorts of noises before, and so I'm reflecting on that as best I can now. And so what I say, regulators, professional bodies, and education standards. The education standards, it's a bit harsh for me to. I know less these days than I did a couple of years ago about education standards at a bachelor's level. However, that is an entry point for a profession. It's not something that's like, what are they teaching these days? It's just, I do not like the blaming of the kids that can happen there. Although I have mentioned before, and I've been fairly public on the fact that increasingly I see, depending on which school of therapies they come out of, I see a lot of therapists that seem to be really good at musing over the shortcomings of an RCT, but really not very good at doing a Lachman's test, which is a very reliable way of testing whether or not someone's got an ACL deficiency. I think that's telling of what's being taught and what's not being taught. And so that practically is a very important MSK skill. Just for example, I used a diagnostic example rather than a treatment example, which is what the editorial was more about, wasn't it? I was generous in some ways of actually saying in this case, and I picked one of several cases I could have picked, where the diagnosis wasn't actually the point of contention. It was the management of that. And also, I'll end with this. The fact that the diagnosis was something that is so common in a presentation that, again, is so common. It wasn't a particularly weird case, right? This is a 62-year-old plumber with OA knee that's had a flare-up. It's affecting his work and his hobbies, and he's worried about the future. It's like 2 or 3 of them could come in every day, at least into a department. And so of all the cases to have a massive variation in care, God forbid, a sort of complex tendinopathy or a backy hip problem that's kind of a bit of both, or a rarer periscapular type pain of the soft tissues and stuff, where everyone's got their own favourite technique for it, and should we do acupuncture and all that sort of stuff. It's like, God, I at least accept that those things are a bit vaguer. It's OA knee. It just beggars belief, and I despair. So as I mentioned at the end there, because all my editorials for MSK Mag then finish with and this is what we're doing in MSK Mag, and this is what Physio Matters are going to try and do to help. And I suppose I'm putting us in a blaze of glory as being the saviors you all need. But it does also mention that, unfortunately, until we get better systems and standards, then it means that the all that we do have is each other. And we're trying to create a community of practice that then offers a bulwark of self-regulation based on the ethical scruples of individual clinicians and the networks that we form. And so, I'm not quite arrogant enough to say we are the answer, but I think hopefully we can be an answer. And that if we do our job right and you do your job right, and we all develop a thick enough skin that people can ask us, why'd you do that? Why'd you do that? And there's not bristle and be defensive and close down and things like that. Then hopefully, as I mentioned, the adults in the room might turn up again, or if they were ever there. But it's just that I get worried about the hiding that goes on because it's awkward. People avoid it too readily, and yeah, I'm getting a bit sick of it. So more rants to come, perhaps, but hopefully I get it out of my system, and that especially when I look, and there's lots to be optimistic about, including this month's MSK Mag's absolutely class, and it's got, you know, those that are paying attention in the right places. There is an awful lot of support out there for how you can be better and how your patients can be better and how you can burn out less, and you can work around various different operational challenges that you have in the industry, and that we as individuals can raise our reputation independent of some of the downdraft that's occurring elsewhere. So anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you so much for listening. If you've got all the way through this, especially, sorry it was a bit ranty. I'll try and cheer up next month. But for now, goodbye. And if I click the right button, you'll get a blaring little outro. Bye-bye.